You're listening to No Plot, Only Lore, a podcast about games and the tables we play them at. Your DMs tonight and every night are Josh and Chris. You can find us on all podcast platforms or check us out at noplotonlylore.com. If you like what you hear today, please rate and review the show and share it with everyone you've ever met.
All right. So today on No Plot Only Lore, we're going to be talking about railroading.
Choo, choo, MFers.
Choo, choo, MFers. Yeah.
So, railroading. Terrible, right? Awful. The worst. No one wants it.
The idea of railroading is 100% the worst thing that anybody has ever come up with in Dungeons & Dragons, and podcast over.
Yeah, easy, simple, done. Next week we're going to talk
Perfect.
for real though, railroading.
For real.
Kind of a necessity, kind of inevitable. Kind of we have some opinions on it.
Yeah. I mean, I absolutely believe that it is inevitable. Like, I don't think that you can even have a game of Dungeons & Dragons or any role-playing game without some railroading happening. Right? Like, your DM is doing all of this prep in the background between your sessions, and if you decide as a group that you don't want to do any of the things that have already been prepped, then the DM has nothing to answer that with. And so if you have spent the last 2 weeks putting together meticulous goblin encounters or whatever it is, then somebody's going to fight some goblins at some point. Right? Kind of doesn't matter how you get there.
Yeah, I mean, at the very basic sense of it, there's going to be at least a little bit of railroading at the start just to sort of push the party together, unless you, for some reason, want to roleplay people's boring lives until they happen to stumble across each other in a tavern. But you've got to do a little bit of something.
Now I feel personally attacked, because that is 100% a thing that
I'm sure you would, but for most people, at least at the very start, they're going to find a reason to push all these people into the same room and then push them out the door together as some sort of unified force. And so, there's that inevitable railroading, but in the end, we're talking about a narrative game, and at some point, a narrative needs to move along in some direction, unless you happen to be the kind of masochist who wants to just improvise everything all the time forever.
Okay, and again with the personal attacks, I'm feeling like we've moved away from attacking your monthly DM and moved straight to 1-2 jabs on Kristoffer.
So,
because I am very strongly on the improvisation track. I do really like to improvise in my games, but even with that, there has to be a certain amount of railroading that is going to naturally occur. And whether or not you consider that railroading, I guess, would be kind of an interesting point of discussion. When does it go from a gentle nudge to the game is on rails?
Right. I mean, there's a big difference between, hey, I'm going to have to strongly set this hook so that you understand it's a hook, versus, I'm just going to tell you what your characters are doing. I think there's sometimes a time and a place for both, but I think it's important to also recognize that things being linear doesn't mean that you're being railroaded. Sometimes B has to follow A because that's just how the world works or whatever.
Okay, so where would you draw that line in your own games?
Well,
when do you feel railroaded?
So my background coming to table, just in my life in general, I spent a lot of time in improv and theater, so I'm used to a term called yes-anding, where whatever's thrown out, the other person grabs and responds with and keeps going. That being said, that's not how I want to play D&D all the time. Because I strongly believe that if you're going to set up a campaign, it has to have a narrative arc. And if you don't have a plan for that narrative arc, then you're just going to kind of be wasting everyone's time. So Unfortunately, as a side effect to needing to move that narrative arc along in a certain direction, you're going to have to sometimes give what I prefer to call like a no but. So the idea that, yeah, this character would like to go in this direction, that, sometimes you give players the option of A, B, C, and they choose Z. And once in a while, that's a fun diversion to take if you're feeling particularly creative. But every once in a while, you have to say, no, actually, Z is a dead end. But you got to find a creative way to do it.
I know that we're trying to limit non sequiturs, given the fact that our last podcast entry was a rambling giant pile of non sequiturs. But have you ever been in a situation where like yes-anding has turned toxic? Because I absolutely have. Like my background is similar. I did a lot of acting and I did a lot of improv, and there were definitely some situations where like somebody brought something to a yes and fest, and it was just absolutely the most toxic shit that they could throw out. Right, where like the situation didn't necessarily call for that thing, but because everybody was supposed to be yes-anding, they were like, and sometimes I like to kick puppies.
Right.
And like everybody just had to roll with that because it was a yes-and scenario.
Right.
Right. So I don't know if you've ever run into that like in a gaming sense, but I've absolutely run into it in improv.
I wouldn't say I've run into specifically toxic situations like you're mentioning. I've definitely run into situations where you're forced to try to yes-and something that is just a bad non sequitur, or maybe less, not making a value judgment on it, but that person has a very limited scope of creativity. For a terrible example, the Office episode where it's very clear that Michael Scott can only improvise as one particular character. I've played with people like that. I've shared a stage with people like that who, haven't quite realized their creative limitations yet, and it's difficult. I've yet to run into anyone truly toxic, but I definitely see the possibility for it there, where someone brings their personal weirdness to the table and just puts everyone in an uncomfortable situation with how they have to respond to that and process it and move forward.
Well, and that I think is where that no but concept comes in. Right, where you have the option of actually kiboshing something. Like, it's very rare. It's very, very rare that I'm going to be in a situation where I'm going to, like, put the boots on, like, a very specific concept that somebody's brought to the table. Right. I'm usually willing to explore a lot of things, but if you build a warlord whose name is Adolf, and you have some very specific ideas about dwarves, then I think we're probably going to have a problem at the table.
Yeah.
Right? So, like, And I think that one interesting aspect of yes-anding is that it is, in my opinion, also a little bit a railroad.
Right.
Right, in that you only have one option, and that option is to keep going with whatever it is that's been brought up. Right, you never have an option to shut down a plot point that isn't necessarily working or isn't contributing to the story or to the game.
Right.
And then move on in a different direction. Right.
Right.
So, I think, for me, my line for railroading has always been, I don't tell players what they're due.
Sure.
Right. Anytime I get into a position where I need to tell the players what it is that they're going to do next, that is me putting the game on rails, right? That's kind of the definition that I run with.
Right. I think that's a pretty reasonable place to draw the line. You're not actually taking control of their characters. You're just sort of, obviously giving them suggestions and nudges in which way that they need to go to progress the story, but you're not actually telling them, like, hey, this is how your character works, or whatever. I think that's pretty reasonable. I would say I'm very much on the same page with you about that. What I will say that I do that I don't think counts as railroading, but if I'm in a game with obviously I'm going to have a decent amount of knowledge of these characters' personalities and motivations and stuff like that up to that point. And what I will sometimes tell people is like their internal emotions or feelings in a situation that you need them to understand how that character should, and I should in like very careful connotation, should be feeling in this situation, and it's not. I don't. I'm not saying like, oh, hey, by the way, like you love this person unconditionally out of nowhere, right? Like it's more like, hey, you see this whatever, and you feel just an instant revulsion and repulsion and unease, right? Something like that, where you're trying to set the mood and the stage for that particular interaction or encounter, whatever it happens to be. But I
See, even that feels like a step too far for me, right? And
really,
like that, I think, yeah, no, I am much more of, like when it comes to the personal reactions
okay,
of my players, I'm always in an ask, don't tell place,
okay,
right? Like, so I will present them with a scenario, I will introduce them to a character, I will present the scene as well as I can, and then if they're not feeling the way that I thought they would about a thing, that's where I'm gonna improvise on
okay,
that, right? Like I'm gonna take that and roll in a different direction. But I have to ask,
okay,
right? So at the end of like a description about like some urchin child huddling next to a pile of boxes with like a tiny hat out,
right,
right? Instead of being like you feel pity or you feel sympathy for this tiny child, I'll ask,
oh,
how do you
oh,
feel
for
about this
sure.
tiny
No,
child?
I think the distinction is like I'm usually talking about like I don't know monsters and things like that, where it's like there should be like it's something you've never seen before, but like let's say they have some sort of magical aura of whatever. I think that's
Oh, that's a different
yeah.
thing. That's a
But
different thing.
like no, I'm not
Yeah,
going to
like
tell them how they feel about like the poor homeless guy they saw. Like, okay, you tell me how you feel about that. Do you care at all? You know?
okay, but how are we going to push our like ridiculous left wing agenda if we're not telling people how they're supposed to feel?
The right way through the courts and the voting and the no, just no. I totally understand not telling your characters how they feel about like NPCs versus you know monsters.
Yeah,
Now
I mean like
that line does get blurred when you're talking about like let's say you've been dealing with an adventure that deals with a lot of bandits, and then you find yourself, oh, maybe this bandit leader's making some good points. Like that, I think is totally different,
mhm.
and definitely one of those scenarios where you need to kind of treat the quote unquote monsters like characters in a way.
Mhm.
But yeah,
Yeah.
it's
See, your example of like the preternatural
yeah,
horror feeling, right? Like that, I feel is part of the set dressing.
okay,
Like that's part of what I would be expressing, and like there's just waves of revulsion coming off of this creature,
sure,
or like the force of the creature's existence weighs on you
gotcha,
like a deep terror,
okay,
right? Like those to me are a little different, but like if the critter's just big,
yeah,
critter's just big,
yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah,
Like I'm not going to tell them that like maybe it's a scary critter to most people, but I'm not going to call it
yeah.
scary,
You
right?
see what
It's
appears
just
to
going
be
to
a
be very
small mountain
large.
stand up or whatever.
Yeah. I might use words like imposing,
Sure.
right, which suggests that they have imposed upon the player characters, but that's a really blurry line.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So what are different ways of setting up like railroading in your games, right? Like if we have assumed that railroading is an inevitability, it is going to happen in your games. What are a couple of the different ways that you've seen that happen?
Oh, that's a great question. So I think railroading obviously exists on sort of a spectrum. of how you handle it. There's the I guess your more style of almost complete hands off and prepare a bunch of possibilities and a bunch of essentially like reactions that
Plot points.
yeah, you kind of have no idea where they're going to go, and you're just kind of making a redundancy list that you just kind of work through to see what you're going to wind up having to use. And then there's the other far end of the spectrum where it's just like, I'm telling you how you're going from point A to point B, and then you just deal with the thing at those different spots. And my personal approach is a bit of a mixture of both. I do prepare multiple redundancies, but I can't account for everything that players do. And so I also prepare something that would be closer to that no but response for anything that falls outside of that. I don't know if there's any. Well, I guess we've discussed a little bit before, personally, the approach that you often see in online content that's closer to just fully on rails while still giving it a little bit of room for improvisation. But I couldn't point to
one that I've always liked, and one that I've used in the past in a couple of games that we've played, is the going on a cruise railroad.
Right.
Where you have a place that you are needing to be, you have like an overarching quest that is of utmost importance, that is happening at one place, and the only way to get there is through hitting all of these stops along the way.
Right.
Right, so one example that we had of that was the game that was set in the bones of a dead god, where you started in the metatarsals in the like heel of the god, and then slowly worked your way up through the bones, and each of the bones represented a different setting or area that we would be exploring, and then it would shift when we got to the next bone.
Sure.
Right, and at each of those points we had like different challenges and different people that we met, and each of those stops didn't feel railroady because that was the direction that we needed to be going.
Right.
But we also had those stops along the way that allowed for broader reactions and like more free-form role-playing within that stop.
Sure.
Along the cruise. So I think that's if I am going to be doing an on-the-rails game, that's kind of the direction that I take with it, is like we're on the rails in the direction we're going, we're on the rails in the stops that we're making. Everything that happens in between there, though, is up to the players.
I think that's a really interesting and helpful approach where you're on rails in a sense, but the rails are not. They're created by the environment in a way. Like there's only. If you need to go from the ankles to the head, there's only one direction you really can go.
Unless you really want to take a detour down the left arm.
And that's. Lord knows that players will definitely want to explore arms for no reason, but.
Oh, yeah, there's fingers down there. We need to find out what's in the fingers. He was probably grasping a magical item when he died, and we're going to own it.
Yeah. Yeah, despite never having any clue about him having any possessions whatsoever.
Did he wear clothes? We don't know.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really useful idea to bring to the table. It's like, let's structure the overall campaign in a way that steers you in a certain direction while still giving freedom. That's a tough balance to find. And
can be.
I'm wondering if what other ways can you sort of, obviously there's your solution of the map or the geography providing rails, but what other areas do you think we could find rails that aren't like hidden rails, essentially?
I like the idea of found rails, where it's just like the DM didn't necessarily plan the rails to be there, but they're definitely there, and choo.
Yeah.
Because I wasn't planning for that campaign to be on rails. It was only looking at it after the fact that I really saw that structure
gotcha
came out of it. I think if you have a very clear party goal,
Yeah.
and there are clear steps that need to be taken to achieve that party goal,
Yeah.
as long as everybody in the party is on board with that goal, it's going to naturally progress through those steps.
Okay.
It's only really when you get into a position where the goal that has been set out by the setting, by the world, by the NPCs, doesn't catch all of the player characters that we start to see people go off the rails
Sure.
and want to do their own things. And that thing that the person at the inn was talking about that goblin warren, sounds super boring to me, so I'm not going to have anything to do with that. I'm just going to go kill some rats on the docks.
Right.
Right, like those kinds of, like, it's only really when the players reject a hook, especially like a large goal hook,
Yeah.
that you need to start to like steer them back to whatever it was you were going to do. And what I usually do in those cases, like I'm very much a flow sheet GM,
Okay.
right? Like I will have a flow sheet of things that kind of need to happen over the course of a session or over the course of the game as a whole.
Okay.
And then I will fit in those things wherever the players happen to be.
Okay.
Whatever the players happen to be doing. So if the rogue that you're talking to has decided that 100% I hate this idea about going and killing some goblins, but I need goblins to happen, then I will have the goblins attack the dogs.
Okay.
Right? So now we have more of an immediate threat, right? And now the player who was going to go and stab some rats is personally invested.
Right.
Because he was going to go and do a thing that was interrupted by these asshole goblins.
Right. And now he's like, well, screw you guys. You took away my fun. Okay.
Yeah. Or you can even like make it worse than that. Like have goblins do a thing near that person that person would hate. Kidnap a child.
Yeah.
Steal a baby. Like anything that is going to provide a stronger emotional hook into whatever it is that you actually want to get done.
Okay.
You can just throw those in. But like, I feel like that requires a bit of experience.
It certainly does.
Like you're not going to be able to pull that out of your butt just because you're playing as a DM for the first time.
Right.
That's the sort of thing where, like, if you are trying to adapt the flow sheet to what your players are doing and they don't necessarily take the first hook, are they going to take the second hook? Do they care about that baby?
No.
They might be perfectly happy letting the goblins eat a baby as long as they get to stab some rats. So yeah.
Yeah, it's so tough to, I mean, especially as a new DM, to understand what actually motivates your players. I mean, you know, we've had situation time and again happen where you think, okay, this is just how a general human being would respond to the situation, and it turns out that your players don't think like human beings, and they don't have any empathy, or they've decided that their character is fully as chaotic as humanly possible and just wanders off.
Or the best, the one that I love the most, is the player who's decided that their character is going to have a real human emotional response to whatever's going on and just be afraid and hide in a corner.
Right. Yeah. That's...
Right? Like they just zero investment in actually getting a thing done.
Yep.
They're just here to fuck around and like drink beers with their friends, and their reaction to any kind of threat is to run and hide.
Very much so. Yeah.
They refuse to be involved in any of the shenanigans that are happening. And like most of the time I will have a conversation with that player after the game and be like, look, you need to either like get involved or we're going to have to ask you to leave the table.
Yeah.
Like
there's a certain amount of just baseline expectation of what people are there to do. You know, like I would have a lot of questions for a person who decided to show up to a role-playing game to play themselves.
Right. Not that, you know, we haven't seen people do that. We've absolutely seen people do
for sure. Or some heightened version of themselves, definitely. But, yeah, I would have so many questions for a person who just hid. But, you know, you have to...
And, like, there's so many fun ways that you can do that don't involve running and hiding.
Correct.
Right? Like, one of my favorite things that's happening in the most recent Dimension 20 run is Brennan's character Tula keeps trying to diffuse situations with kindness.
Okay.
Right, like they're in the middle of a combat situation, and she's like, "No, I'm gonna go heal the wolf that just bit my child because I feel a huge amount of empathy for that creature," and it keeps working. Like, so
There's,
they'll get into a situation that is life or death for everybody, and Tula's like, "No, no, no, calm down, calm down." Goose fraba. Just like,
there's,
and I think that's great.
yeah, there's something to be said for someone's weird idea also just succeeding all the time.
But like the idea that you don't necessarily have to be a violent murder hobo to play D&D. Like, you can go in and try to diffuse situations with non-violence, and it will work sometimes. And like, there are definitely games that I've played where violence is sometimes an answer, but it's rarely the right one.
Right.
So it's fun to see stuff like that, but like just running and hiding and refusing to engage.
Well, even, frankly speaking, the example I used in week 1, where it turns out that violence was absolutely the wrong answer. And it got me dead. Super
it did
duper dead.
Get you dead.
Um,
do we want to issue a retraction to your DM for you being a ravenous murder hobo?
no, because
Flurry of blows punching a dead wizard's head to dust.
I make no apologies for being an idiot. It was in character, so I feel that's fine. But I will say, like, sort of to your point of hey, you don't always have to violence everything. You could also disguise your violence. I mean, going back to the old well of my personal life dripping into the conversation, but my new character, the way that I'm playing things out mechanically, he's not doing anything. He's running and hiding, and other people are doing the fighting for him.
And you spent a whole bunch of sorcerer classes recreating the warlord class.
I did. And if anyone wants my guide for how to do it, I'll tell you later.
We'll post it on the page.
Yeah. But, the game is obviously flexible enough that you can murder your way through things, or you can say, I'm still going to fight everything, but I'm not actually doing lethal damage because I don't believe in killing, because I'm Batman, or whatever. Like, there's lots of options available to you,
Yeah. Well, and speaking of your game, one thing I did want to talk about a little bit is how, like, D&D modules, the way that they're produced, the way that they're published, are kind of railroady by design.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if you played any of the older modules. Like, I know you started in 4th edition, but did you ever go back and play, like, any 3rd or 2nd?
I spent one time doing a little bit of Tomb of Horrors, and that's it.
Okay. Neat. And actually, Tomb of Horrors is a really good example, because Tomb of Horrors is railroady as fuck.
Yeah, for sure.
Like, it is very much like just dropping you into the middle of a horrible situation, and then here's the next room that you're in, here's the next room that you're in, here's the next room that you're
yes.
in. So like those older dungeons, and actually the first dungeon that I ever played in was a module that my buddy Landon bought when we were 9.
Okay.
And it was very much a box of maps.
Okay.
And that like little booklet that had the gray text that you're supposed to read to your players.
Sure.
And so that's exactly what we did. We played it as written. He read the text. I moved my characters. The next time I would read the text, he would move the characters, right? And we would like play a session of D&D right out of that book. And there is no room for maneuvering in those, right? Like if you start trying to improvise as written, It just doesn't work.
Right.
Right, like they give you all of the options that you're able to do, and this was first edition D&D, so it was a long ass time
Right.
ago. But the idea of improvising at that time, I don't think had even really gotten into anybody's head.
Sure.
Right, because the module as written was just the war scenario that you were supposed to be moving through according to like the war game rules.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Right. So.
Well, and it's funny you say that because I mean, pre-written modules are how I started DMing because I had no creativity and was just trying to facilitate facilitate a game that I found fun for friends who had no real interest.
Has that changed, Josh? Have you discovered creativity?
No.
Perfect.
I'll just be straight up with you.
Oh man, other non sequitur. Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but one thing that I'm finding really interesting about some of my more recent groups is the prevalence of aphantasia in people who play role playing games. Are you familiar with aphantasia?
I'm familiar with the word fantasia.
Okay, so aphantasia is the idea that you don't have a visual imagination.
Oh.
Right? Like you don't see pictures in your head when you're imagining things.
That is bizarre to me. And you're saying you've run into this a lot?
Way more than I would have expected. Yeah.
Huh.
Like it currently on like my table with the group that I'm playing with right now, there are 2 people of the 4 people who have aphantasia.
That's fascinating to me.
Right?
You know, I've heard of people who just have no inner monologue or have a hard time.
Worries me. I don't understand.
Yeah.
Like that made me feel like I'm mildly schizophrenic. Because the voice that I hear in my inner monologue is real distinct.
Oh yeah, definitely. Same with me, and I have a very, like, I don't want to say aggressive, but yeah, very outspoken internal monologue. And the idea that people just have nothing going on in their head all day, they're just not.
Well, a friend of mine, she has aphantasia, and I definitely do not.
Yeah.
Like I'm the type of person who would, like, as I'm reading a book, I'm watching a movie in my head. I don't even see the words anymore after a while. I'm just like, I'm skimming them. They're going directly into my brain and being translated into a movie.
Oh, absolutely.
She is very jealous because, like, my version of reading is I stare at a page and hallucinate vividly.
Okay.
Her version of reading is she's just reading the words.
That's so strange to me.
It doesn't translate to anything.
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons I enjoy Dan Abnett's work in particular is because he's so excellent at describing, like, combat and details about people that you think are just minor, but really, like, in my brain click to make the scene real.
Well, that's what I like about Sanderson's work too. Is like a lot of it is like set dressing and like kind of slow at the beginning, but like once you hit that Sanderlanche, right? Like the end of his books where just like stuff is happening. It's just I turn my brain off and I'm just experiencing the movie of what is happening and all of like crazy magic nonsense that's going on. Yeah, I can't even imagine reading a book without that.
Yeah. So then, okay, so bringing it back to the topic.
Yeah.
Would you think that people who are incapable of visualizing what's going on in that way might benefit from a little bit more railroading? Or do you find that their creativity isn't particularly affected by it?
My experience with it so far has suggested that the like the experience that they're having playing the game might be different from mine, but their ability to enjoy the game isn't affected.
Sure. But like, are they, I guess, contributing towards overall group direction in the same way, or Are they having?
This is the first time I've been aware of
Okay.
it. Especially like before we've been playing, so I haven't really had a chance to really dig into
Okay.
it. Um, but yeah, as far as I can tell, they are doing as much as anybody else for that. It's just like the way that they're experiencing the game. They're the kind of players who really like to have minis,
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
Because it's so much easier for them to understand the flow of what's
And
going
it
on.
really helps them to
Um,
like inhabit the space better.
yeah, they're really benefiting from visual cues. I have a lot of like stuff that I've had made on Mid Journey
Okay.
for like random visual cues that have been really helpful for immersion and
Okay.
stuff. So I'm kind of trying those things out with the game. But yeah, as far as like their ability to improvise, their ability to plan, their ability to like play the game, I haven't seen any impact yet.
Interesting. Because I
So
just hearing that, I would assume that like their ability to insert themselves into the setting would be pretty heavily impacted if they couldn't like imagine themselves there or imagine what being described looks like. Like if they have to.
well, and I do wonder how it's going to impact shared imagined space,
Right.
right? Like the theater of the mind nonsense that I find so enthralling in role playing games.
Right.
They've just got nothing there,
Yeah.
right? There is no theater. It is just the mind.
That mind
Which
is not
again, like
helping.
I can't even like contemplate what that would look like.
Yeah.
Right? Like I have such a hard
It's
time.
so alien to me.
Um, right, because so much of my imagination is
Yeah.
visual, and so much of my experience of D&D is that same shared imagined space that I get from reading books, where instead of reading words on a dead tree and hallucinating, I'm chatting with my friends and hallucinating. This is drugs for me.
Sure. Sure.
Like, so yeah, no, it's been a really interesting thing for that.
It's just yeah, because I mean, even you think about like the discourse that comes when a book is turned into a movie, and everyone's discussing the differences in how they saw the character versus what appeared on screen, and that's just like not a conversation those people have because they didn't imagine that character.
Hey, editing Kristoffer here. Just a heads up, we're about to get into a book called Seveneves by Neal Stephenson. And if you have not read that book and you would like to avoid spoilers, you should probably skip to the 42-minute point. Just figured I'd give you a warning. Spoilers ahead. Well, I was talking to one of them about a book, and this is the way that it came out. Is actually he recommended a book to me called Seveneves,
Okay.
and we were discussing pre-apocalyptic literature.
Okay.
So like any kind of book where it's leading up to the apocalypse and like the people's reactions to the
Sure.
apocalypse that is going to happen. And this was a really great example of it. Like Seveneves, the plot is basically something hits the moon and breaks it.
Okay.
And we have 2 years to figure out how to live in space as a species, or humanity is doomed.
Okay.
Because those pieces of the moon are going to start crashing together, and they're going to start creating more chunks,
Right.
and those chunks are eventually going to fall into the atmosphere and kill everyone.
Right. Is this that that cozy fiction you were talking about before, where it's just like a calm, confident? It's a comforting.
This
thought?
is so far on the opposite direction.
Ah.
This was incredibly tense and difficult for me to
Okay.
But like the first 2 chunks of the book are about getting all of the preparations done and getting people into space, and then the second chunk is about the first people that are living in space as a society with a planet that is destroyed.
Right. Okay.
And the third chunk happens 5,000 years in the future,
Ugh.
which is fine.
Okay.
I'm fine with a big
That
time
is a
jump.
big time jump.
It is a big time jump. My problem in the third chunk was that I didn't have any characters that I cared about because they were like 5,000 years younger than all of the characters that I'd been caring about so far.
Right.
And the way the author was describing things was incredibly clinical.
I see.
Right? Like he was getting really into the technology and how the technology worked and he was getting really into like this is exactly the social setup for this giant ring that now exists around the planet Earth, and like these are all of the social factions that exist. And I was
He
just
just
like,
got a
I
little
don't
too far in
fucking
the weeds,
care,
yeah.
bruh. Like none of this matters to me. Give me characters I can care about for a minute.
Right.
And when I was discussing that with my friend, who's also one of the players in the table, he said that was his favorite part.
The super detailed descriptions.
Super detailed descriptions about the technology. He wanted to know how the technology worked. He didn't imagine it in his head. He wasn't imagining what it looked like. He was imagining how it worked. He was thinking about the way that technology would impact things. Right, and so for me, I couldn't get past the lack of like visual cues. I couldn't get past the lack of like character investments. Right. But for him, that shit didn't matter at all. He wasn't watching a movie in his head. He was reading for fun technology.
So bizarre,
right? But it's so interesting as well, right? Like as trying to imagine what that would be like is really hard because I'm imagining it visually.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, no, really, really, really interesting for me. Anyway, that's way, way off the topic of railroading. I don't know how to get back to it.
No, that's okay. No. we'll get back to it. Let's just check the show notes and
let's talk about Matt Mercer.
Let's talk about Matt effing Mercer. Yeah,
because like as we noted before, like there is that thing that happens where in Critical Role or D20 or any of the Dungeons and Dragons stuff that's made for shows. Yep. There is that moment that happens where the DM tells a player what their character does.
Yep.
Because they need to move the show along.
It's true.
And they can't continue to linger in that scene because one thing that I've noticed as well is that on D20 in particular, the splitting of the party is almost constant.
Yes, absolutely.
Right? Like they absolutely break it up into scenes that involve different groups of players. Yeah. And so you can't spend any longer in that scene. You've got a flow that you've got to maintain for that. And so you tell the players what they do, and then you move on to the next scene.
Yep.
Every time it happens, it raises my hackles. I get mad.
Mad? What is it that you're mad at?
I am grumpy at the lack of player agency.
Okay.
Right? Like, what if he didn't want to go outside and get that cab? What if there was something else he wanted to do at his apartment? And, like, I get it. You need to make sure that scene is ending where it's ending. But, like, anytime I tell a player what they do, even if it's just an assumption, right, it makes me feel like I've done something wrong. Right? So, like, my ending of a scene, or my ending of a turn, always goes, is that you? Is that everything?
Yeah.
Is that everything you wanted to do? Right, and then we move on.
I understand your resistance to that particular move. And I know you understand conceptually why they're doing it. But it's like we said, a certain amount is inevitable, and we're not. I think, frankly, it's. We need to stop talking about these shows like they are role-playing games. Mm-hmm. You know, they are in the same way that pro wrestling is not really a sport. It's.
I'm sorry, you what? Are you trying to break kayfabe right now, sir? How dare you?
Yeah, all right. Anyways.
The Undertaker is on his way to your house.
Yeah, sure.
He's going to kick your ass for that.
But, no, do you get what I'm saying? It's
no,
role-playing entertainment versus actual role-playing, you know? I think the biggest thing that... Like, I choose not to let these things really influence my life all that much. I don't follow any of them particularly closely. I enjoy some funny YouTube shorts once in a while, but I don't watch full series because I can't watch that and remain like objective, if that makes sense.
No, I want you to describe that more. I am intrigued by this.
I can't watch something that I know how to do being done intentionally wrong.
Ooh,
Does that make sense?
it does, and I want to talk about that a lot more. And it feels like it should be its own fucking
It
episode.
yeah,
Oh
that this
man,
goes into the deep dark problems in my psyche, but I
is this is are you accusing D20 and Critical Role of being like the porn of sex?
yes, absolutely, 100%. That's
As porn is to sex, Critical Role is to D&D.
yes,
Setting up unrealistic expectations for the girth of your sword.
yes,
That okay.
100%. It is stunt role playing. Because
Okay. That
never mind how they're playing the game. Like obviously they're going to be as mechanically correct as possible, but you're talking about a table full of people who are better improvisers than everyone you've met in your entire life, running a campaign that has been written by someone whose full-time job is figuring out how this campaign should go and what would make a good story. Like, if these people weren't running campaigns, they'd be writing books that are that storyline, right? So to sit there and then expect that that's how role-playing works is just laughable. And I understand that they're doing it wrong on purpose. I'm not begrudging them that, but that also doesn't mean I have to participate in their.
that's interesting because like I maybe it's just like my weird parasocial relationship with Brennan Lee Mulligan and how we're
Sure.
best friends in my imagination. But like, I find it very easy to get into the shared imagined space with them. Right, like it's very easy for me to just kind of like sit back and let that story wash over me the same way an audiobook would.
Oh, interesting.
And so I am listening to an audio play. I'm watching some people who I have weird parasocial relationships with
Okay.
do a thing that I like to do in a way that is also a story that I'm digesting.
That's interesting. I actually have the sort of opposite feeling. I can't get into the story in that way when it's so
Because
like.
they're doing it wrong.
What's that?
Because they're doing it wrong.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting was like I've never been able to watch an episode of, what's their names? The big guys there, Critical Role, but I was able to
Matt.
watch their cartoon series.
The cartoon series was great.
Yeah, and I think the difference was that like it buried the role playing game, and I just got to see a narrative happen, and I didn't have to think about how they were doing a bad role playing game. I just got to see, like you do, a story that I was.
That is so intriguing because like my experience with the animated series was actually a little bit the opposite.
Oh, really?
Where I was seeing the roles that were made.
Ah,
Right? I was looking at the spells that they were casting, and I was like looking at all of the mechanical stuff that was happening in the background, and like some of the mechanical bits that had been fudged.
Yep.
And some of the stuff that they had done that where they used kind of an interesting version of a rule
Okay.
to do a thing. And so like I had a bit of trouble turning my DM brain off for Vox Machina.
That's yeah, because like you said, like my DM brain was completely off because it was just like, well, this is just a cartoon about some weirdos, and oh, look at all those D&D references.
Well, and like for watching D20, I have some difficulty getting into Critical Role. I think it's just that
They're too pretty.
the structure, they are really pretty. The entire
The
cast
whole
and
cast
crew
is just,
oh my god, it's ridiculous how attractive all of those people are.
and that is so not representative of role playing games. Just
Like, I don't know if I want to like have sex with or be Travis,
Oh,
but it's one of them.
oh yeah, oh yeah.
That man is ridiculously
It's
attractive.
probably
Anyway.
both.
Maybe a bit of both. Yeah, if I could just shape change into him and then also fuck him,
Yeah.
I think that would be a fantastic evening. We're editing this, right?
No part of it whatsoever. If I had to deal with spilling my real world problems last week, you can deal with outing yourself publicly.
Good. No, but like, yeah, I have some difficulty getting into Critical Role.
Yeah.
I think largely because the pacing is a little slower. And like I really appreciate all of those people as players, and if they were sitting at my table, we would be having a great
Absolutely.
time. But watching them play is a little less engaging for me than the D20 crew, and I think that speaks to like production quality and experience with the like show biz part of it, because like that's the College Humor crew,
Yeah.
right? Like they've got a lot of experience building shows and like making a show that works and making sure that the timing is right and making sure that all of the lights and the effects and like their fucking dome is ridiculous.
Oh yeah.
I wouldn't be able to DM in there. It would be too distracting.
Yep.
But like,
don't worry, I don't think they're inviting you.
I mean, give it a minute for the podcast to get popular. Okay. they might invite me to play. We'll see how it goes, and then I'll just be like sitting there across from Travis, sweating. I'll luck into that one season where they get him in, and it's gonna be brutal. But yeah, like what was it I was about to say? Nope, I've lost it.
Okay.
Lost it forever.
Well, it's probably super important, and we're gonna be worse off for having lost it. But
I know
that's okay.
Yeah, it was definitely getting back to the topic, though.
No, we'll find our way there eventually.
Of like railroading. Right. No, the thing that I was gonna say. Okay, I remember
great.
now. Do you think?
No.
And I have an opinion about this as
Okay.
well. But do you think that the way that role-playing games is shown in these shows is making new DMs more railroady?
Oh,
do you
absolutely.
think that they are going to be railroading more?
Absolutely. I super have already felt like the oversized influence of these guys in players, and then now I've seen it happen in new DMs, because there's not a lot of good examples out there of like how to run like a real campaign, because every example that you wind up going with is from something that is super time constrained, and has a super big production behind it. Even going back to when I got into things, and the Penny Arcade fellas were starting to do their podcast adventures.
Shout out to Mike Perkins, though.
Yeah. Oh, hey, that guy,
Chris Perkins. Chris
Perkins
so
is fantastic, and definitely there are things about how he DMs that you should 100% model and steal for yourself.
He's a little bit my nemesis. Back when I was working in the games industry, he and I would have occasional conversations that were heated.
Oh no!
But I love him to bits. It was rules talk.
Oh, for sure.
It was just like, yeah, like, how dare you 5th edition on my 4th edition?
Right.
I was like the one person at the entire convention that was like, yay, 4th edition, and then they were like, 5th edition's happening, and I was like, oh no.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, again, as great of a DM as he is, you understand quickly he's running one shots.
Yeah.
You don't really get to see people explore the world over the course of a regular campaign.
That's such an important skill too, though, right? Like the one shot is, I think, an underrated art form in role playing.
Definitely. How do you have one good Saturday of role playing with people
And keep it under 12 hours.
Yeah. How do you
Yeah.
condense? Like I would say, a good one shot doesn't have to be down to one night, but like 6 hours I think is not unreasonable. But again, there's also a skill to just running those one offers at for a Wednesday night group that is only 2 hours. Um,
Yep.
I can't do it. I'll tell you right now. I'm terrible at running short things.
I have a feeling that has something to do with your height. Um, really easy running over short things.
Yeah. Just steamroll the short stuff.
No, but and actually, interestingly, this isn't in our notes, and I'm not sure we're going to have time to delve into it too terribly hefty because we're trying to keep to 1 hour or close to it. But like one shots by necessity have to be more railroaded than a longer campaign, because a longer campaign you've got time to breathe.
Definitely.
Right, you've got time to like move out and explore different areas and all of that. One shot, you've got a solid like 5 hours of playing,
Yeah.
and shit has to get done.
Yeah.
Right, or you're just not going to get through the story.
Well, and frankly, you also have to like establish relationships faster and motivations faster,
Yeah.
and so you need to kind of, like I was saying earlier, be a little more like, this is how you feel about the situation. You love this guy because he's your best friend, and also he's telling you to go do this thing. Go.
And he might be a wizard
Yeah.
that is very old and knows all of the dragons by name.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. So that might actually be an interesting idea for another episode too. Is just like how to do one shots. Although you just told me you're terrible at them, so maybe we won't talk.
Well, no. So where I am good at is taking pre-written one shots and running those with people, which
Okay.
I think is a great way to sort of start DMing. It's just run something that's low stakes, that's already sort of pre-written, and learning how to move people through an adventure, and then you get around to writing an adventure as opposed to just experiencing it.
All right. So final minutes here. What is our conclusion on railroading? I think railroading always bad.
I think honestly though, to sum it up, railroading is a tool like anything else in your storytelling toolbox. It's something that I think you need to use a lot of discretion with. We didn't get a chance to touch on it, but I think it's also one of those things that you may apply more freely early on with newer players and pull back on it as they get more experience. But it's not something that you can pretend will never happen. And if it does never happen, maybe you're sort of losing control of the game and people are going to wind up being a little disinterested because nothing's going anywhere. They're just kind of farting around.
Or you just have the best players that have ever existed.
Yeah. Somehow you've lucked into this incredible crew and you have to take no responsibility, but whatever.
Yeah. You just have to sit there and like feed them settings sometimes, and then they will fill in all the blanks.
Yeah.
I'm going to go find goblins, and then I'm going to find the goblin entry in the monster manual for you so that I can fight those goblins.
Yeah. And also, not only the true definition of no plot, only lore. You just set it up, and then they'll run through whatever, and they'll figure out the plot on their own.
Perfect. Because there is no plot. It's all found.
Yeah.
Just lore.
Just lore.
As long as you got the lore.
Just bring the lore.